Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're seeking calm, deep rest, and peaceful sleep, you're in the right place. Let's begin.
For thousands of years, Zen masters have understood something profound about the human heart. We suffer not because we lack what we need, but because we hold too tightly to what we have. Tonight, we'll go on a journey through ancient stories about people who carried too much, grasped too tightly, tried too hard. And we'll discover what they learned when they finally opened their hands and let go. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. These teachings aren't complicated philosophies or difficult practices. They're simple truths about what happens when we stop fighting against life and learn to move with it instead. As you listen, allow your body to settle deeper into the support beneath you. There's nowhere else you need to be right now. Nothing you need to accomplish. Each story will guide you toward a deeper understanding of letting go. Not as loss, but as freedom. Not as giving up, but as waking up to the peace that was always here. So relax now. Take one more slow, deep breath. And let's begin this gentle journey together. In a coastal town where merchants came from distant lands, there lived a tea trader named Hiroshi. For 20 years, he had built his business carefully, selecting the finest leaves, treating his workers fairly, earning respect throughout the region. His warehouse near the harbor was filled with rare teas from the mountain provinces. His home was simple but comfortable. His daughter was preparing to marry. Life had been good to Hiroshi, and he felt grateful. Then the great storm came. The winds arrived without warning on an autumn evening. Hiroshi watched from his window as the sky turned the color of old iron. Rain fell so heavily it seemed the ocean itself had lifted into the air. By morning, the warehouse was gone. The harbor was destroyed. Ships lay broken against the rocks like discarded toys. Hiroshi stood in the ruins of his warehouse, water still pooling around his feet. Every chest of tea had been swept away or ruined. 20 years of careful work, gone in a single night. He felt his legs weaken beneath him. In the months that followed, Hiroshi rebuilt what he could. His reputation remained intact. His skills were unchanged. Customers still trusted him. He found new suppliers and arranged new shipments. Within a year, his business was functioning again, though on a smaller scale. But something had changed inside him. Every day, Hiroshi would find his mind drifting back to that night. He would replay the storm in his thoughts, imagining different choices he might have made. If only he had moved the tea to higher ground. If only he had stored less inventory near the harbor. If only he had prepared better. At night, sleep came slowly, if it came at all. He would lie awake calculating what he had lost. Not just in money, but in time, in effort, in the future he had planned. He would see his warehouse as it had been, filled with orderly rows of tea chests, everything in its place. Then the image would shift to wreckage, and his heart would pound as if the storm were happening again. His wife noticed that he no longer enjoyed his tea in the morning, the small ritual that had once brought him such pleasure. His daughter saw that his eyes looked distant even when he smiled at her wedding. His workers observed that he checked and rechecked everything, unable to trust that anything was secure. One day, an old monk named Soyen came to Hiroshi's shop to buy tea. Soyen had been traveling through the region and had heard about Hiroshi's reputation for quality. As Hiroshi prepared the tea, his hands moved with practiced skill, but his face carried a heaviness that caught the monk's attention. "You make tea with great care," Soyen observed, "but you don't seem to take any joy in it." Hiroshi looked up, surprised that this stranger could see so clearly. Something in the monk's gentle presence made him want to speak honestly. "I used to love this work," Hiroshi said quietly. "But after the storm, after losing everything, I can't seem to find the same feeling. Every day I remember what I had, what I lost. The memory sits on my chest like a stone." Soyen nodded slowly. "Tell me, where is this storm now?" Hiroshi looked confused. "Master, it happened a year ago. It's in the past." "Then where is it?" Soyen asked again, not unkindly. "In my memory, I suppose." "Ah. And this memory, is it the same as the actual storm?" Hiroshi paused. "No. The storm was wind and water. The memory is just thoughts." "Yet which one disturbs your sleep?" Soyen asked. "The wind and water that ended a year ago, or the thoughts that continue now?" Hiroshi sat down slowly on a stool behind his counter. He had never considered this distinction before. The storm itself had been terrible but brief. The suffering he carried now came entirely from his mind's endless replaying of that night, his constant measuring of what was against what had been. "I've been carrying the storm with me," he said softly. "Every day, all day." "Yes," Soyen replied. "And is there room in your hands for new tea when they're full of old storms?" Hiroshi looked down at his hands. They were empty, but they didn't feel empty. He realized he had been holding so tightly to what he had lost that he couldn't fully grasp what he had now. "The storm took your tea," Soyen continued, sipping the cup Hiroshi had prepared. "But you're allowing the memory to take your peace, your joy, your presence with your family. Which loss is greater?" That night, Hiroshi lay in bed and tried something different. When the memory of the storm arose, instead of fighting it or following it into endless calculations of loss, he simply noticed it. "This is a thought about the past," he would acknowledge. Then he would return his attention to the present moment. The feeling of his blanket, the sound of his wife's breathing beside him, the cool night air. The thoughts kept coming, as thoughts do. But slowly, over many nights, Hiroshi learned to let them pass like clouds across the sky. The storm had happened. That was true. He had lost a great deal. That was also true. But the storm was not still happening. The loss was not still occurring. Only his mind insisted on making it present. Months later, Soyen passed through the town again and stopped at Hiroshi's shop. The merchant looked different. His face had relaxed. His movements seemed lighter. When he prepared the tea, he paused to smell the leaves, a small gesture of appreciation that had been absent before. "I see you found your hands again," Soyen said with a smile. Hiroshi understood what the monk meant. "Yes. When I stopped carrying the storm, I could carry tea again." not just with my hands, but with my whole heart. And your sleep? Soyen asked. Better. When I lie down now, I don't bring the warehouse with me. I bring only this body, this breath, this moment. The past visits sometimes, but I no longer invite it to stay. This story shows us something important about the nature of burdens. Hiroshi's actual loss was significant and real. The storm had taken his tea, damaged his business, disrupted his plans. These were genuine difficulties that required practical responses. And Hiroshi handled these practical matters well. He rebuilt, found new suppliers, continued his work. But alongside the practical challenges, Hiroshi created an additional burden that served no purpose. He carried the memory of loss as if it were happening continuously. He replayed the storm in his mind thousands of times, each replay adding fresh suffering to old events. The Buddha taught that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is what happens when life brings difficulties. We feel the loss, the disappointment, the disruption. This is natural and healthy. But suffering is what we add through our relationship with that pain. When we cling to painful memories, rehearse them endlessly, and make them perpetually present, we multiply our distress far beyond the original difficulty. Soyen's question about where the storm was located helped Hiroshi see this distinction. The actual storm, the real event, had ended. It existed only in the past, which means it didn't exist at all except as memory. Yet Hiroshi was reacting to this memory as if the storm was still destroying his warehouse night after night. This is the burden we carry when we hold too tightly to what has been. We think we're honoring what we lost or protecting ourselves from future loss. But we're actually imprisoning ourselves in a past that no longer exists anywhere except in our thoughts. The teaching about hands being too full of old storms to hold new tea captures this beautifully. When our inner world is crowded with what we've lost, what went wrong, what should have been different, we cannot fully receive what is actually here now. Hiroshi's business had recovered. His family was well. His skills remained. But he couldn't appreciate any of this because his attention was trapped in the past. Learning to let go doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending losses don't matter. Hiroshi still remembered the storm. He still knew what he had lost. But he learned to remember without clinging, to acknowledge without drowning in the memory. He discovered that he could honor his past without being imprisoned by it. This practice of noticing thoughts as thoughts rather than as reality is fundamental to Zen. When Hiroshi learned to say, "This is a thought about the past," and return to the present, he found a kind of freedom that wasn't available as long as he believed every thought was truth that demanded his attention. Tonight, when your mind brings you memories of difficulties, losses, or disappointments, you might try Hiroshi's approach. Notice that these are thoughts about past events, not the events themselves. You don't need to fight the thoughts or make them go away. Simply recognize them as weather in the mind, passing clouds that need not be carried. In the hills above the town where Hiroshi lived, there was a monastery where monks studied the ancient texts and practiced meditation. Among these monks was one called Kenjiro, known throughout the monastery for his remarkable memory and dedication to learning. Kenjiro had spent 15 years copying sutras, studying commentaries, and memorizing teachings. He could recite hundreds of passages perfectly. He had filled dozens of notebooks with his insights and understandings. Other monks would come to him with questions about obscure points of doctrine, and Kenjiro could always provide answers supported by multiple sources. His teacher, Master Bankei, watched Kenjiro's accumulation of knowledge with quiet concern. The young monk was sincere and devoted, but Bankei sensed that all this gathering was becoming an obstacle rather than an aid. Kenjiro seemed to be building a fortress of understanding, each sutra another stone in the wall. One spring, Master Bankei told Kenjiro about a hermit living deep in the mountains who was said to have profound understanding. "Go visit him," Bankei suggested. "Bring your most important notebooks. Perhaps he can show you something new." Kenjiro was excited by this opportunity. He carefully selected his best work, the notebooks containing his deepest insights, the most elegant explanations, the clearest breakdowns of difficult concepts. He packed them lovingly into a leather satchel and set off into the mountains. The journey took 3 days of steep climbing along narrow trails. On the second day, Kenjiro had to cross a rope bridge over a deep gorge. A river ran far below, its water white and rushing over rocks. The bridge was old but seemed sturdy enough. Kenjiro was halfway across when he heard a crack. One of the ropes had frayed through. The bridge lurched sideways, and Kenjiro grabbed the remaining ropes desperately. His satchel slipped from his shoulder. He watched in horror as it fell, tumbling through the air, his precious notebooks scattering like birds before splashing into the river below. He made it across the bridge and collapsed on solid ground, breathing hard. Then the reality sank in. 15 years of work. Gone. Every carefully copied sutra. Every insight he had recorded. Every understanding he had cultivated. All of it swept away in seconds. Kenjiro sat by the trail and wept. He felt as if his entire identity had fallen into that gorge. Without his notebooks, who was he? What did he have to offer? His accumulated knowledge had been his treasure, his contribution, his worth. Now he had nothing. Eventually, he continued to the hermit's cave, though he felt he had no reason to anymore. What could he discuss without his references? How could he demonstrate his understanding without his notes? The hermit was an ancient man named Soku, living in a simple cave with only a sleeping mat and a water bowl. When Kenjiro explained what had happened, expecting sympathy, Soku's face broke into a wide smile. "Wonderful," Soku said. "Now we can begin." Kenjiro stared at him. "Begin what?" "I've lost everything." "You've lost your collection," Soku corrected gently. "Not everything. Tell me, before you read your first sutra, before you copied your first text, what were you?" "I was nothing. I was ignorant." "Were you?" Soku asked. "You had no awareness? No capacity to understand? No Buddha nature?" Kenjiro started to answer, then stopped. He had always assumed that wisdom came from accumulation, from building understanding piece by piece until you had enough. But Soku was suggesting something different. "The notebooks you lost," Soku continued, "what were they made of?" "Paper. Ink. And the insights written on them? Words. Concepts. Explanations. And the understanding you seek, is it made of paper and ink?" Kenjiro sat in silence. He had spent 15 years treating wisdom as if it was something that could be possessed, stored, displayed. He had confused the map with the territory, the description with the reality. "Sit with me," Soku invited. "Not as a learned monk with much knowledge, but as you are right now, with empty hands." They sat together in silence. At first, Kenjiro's mind raced, trying to fill the emptiness with memories of his lost work. But gradually, as the afternoon light shifted in the cave mouth, something else emerged. Without his notebooks to refer to, Kenjiro found himself simply present. Without his accumulated knowledge to organize and protect, he discovered a different kind of awareness. Not the busy knowing that catalogues and compares, but a quiet, spacious presence that needed nothing added to it. As the sun set, Soku asked, "What teaching have you received today?" Kenjiro thought carefully before responding. "I learned that I had been collecting descriptions of the moon while ignoring the moon itself. I had been so busy gathering words about awakening that I had no attention left for awakening." "And now?" Soku asked. "Now I have nothing to carry, nothing to protect, nothing to prove." Kenjiro paused, noticing how light he felt. "It's strange. I should feel devastated. But instead, I feel free." Soku nodded. "The river was very kind to you today. It took away what was hiding your true nature." Kenjiro stayed with Soku for a month, learning a different kind of practice. Instead of accumulating understanding, he learned to rest in awareness itself. Instead of collecting teachings, he learned to embody them. When he finally returned to his monastery, he brought nothing but himself. Master Bankei noticed the change immediately. Kenjiro walked differently, lighter somehow. His eyes were clearer. When other monks came to him with questions now, instead of reciting memorized answers, he would pause, listen deeply, and respond from direct understanding rather than from his collection of knowledge. "Master," a young monk asked Bankei one day, "what happened to Kenjiro in the mountains? He seems like a different person." "He lost what he thought he needed," Bankei replied, "and found what was there all along." This story of Kenjiro reveals another kind of burden we carry, one that's especially subtle because it disguises itself as something good. Spiritual accumulation can become as much of a trap as any material possession. Kenjiro's devotion to learning was genuine. His desire to understand was sincere. But over time, his practice had shifted from being about awakening to being about collecting proof of awakening. He had become attached to his spiritual resume, his identity as a learned monk, his ability to demonstrate knowledge. The river that took Kenjiro's notebooks did him an enormous service. It forced him to discover the difference between understanding that comes from accumulation and understanding that comes from direct seeing. The first kind requires constant effort to maintain. The second is always present, requiring only that we stop obscuring it. Soku's questions helped Kenjiro realize what he had been doing. By asking what Kenjiro was before he read his first sutra, Soku pointed to a kind of original completeness that exists prior to all accumulation. This doesn't mean knowledge is useless, but that it serves us best when it doesn't become something we identify with and cling to. Kenjiro's discovery that losing everything made him feel free rather than devastated reveals something profound about the nature of burden. Much of what we carry feels heavy not because it's valuable, but because we've made it part of our identity. When it's taken away, we fear we'll be nothing. But what we often find is that we're actually lighter, more present, more ourselves. This teaching connects directly to the practice of letting go that supports deep rest. Many of us carry our spiritual practice itself as a burden. We worry about whether we're meditating correctly, making sufficient progress, understanding deeply enough. We turn the path to freedom into another source of anxiety and self-judgment. Like Kenjiro sitting with empty hands in Soku's cave, you might discover that the awareness you seek doesn't need to be built or accumulated. It's already here, always has been, waiting beneath your collections and achievements. The peace you long for isn't something to gather, but something to uncover by letting go of what hides it. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about attachment being the root of suffering. Not that we shouldn't have possessions or knowledge or memories, but that when we cling to these things as if our well-being depends on them, we create our own suffering. We make ourselves small by building walls of what we own, what we know, what we've achieved. The good news is that letting go isn't something we must force or achieve. It's more like what happened to Hiroshi and Kenjiro. They both reached a point where they could finally see what they'd been doing. And in that seeing, the burden naturally released. As your breathing slows now and your body settles deeper into rest, you don't need to carry anything with you into sleep. Not the day's concerns, not your spiritual progress, not your accumulated wisdom or worries. For these hours, you can be like Kenjiro after the river took his notebooks. Empty-handed, but complete. Unburdened and free. In a valley known for its fertile soil, there lived a farmer named Takeo who had recently inherited his father's land. Takeo was young and eager to prove himself worthy of this inheritance. He had watched his father farm for years and thought he understood the work well enough. His father had made farming look effortless. He would plant seeds, water them regularly, and trust the earth to do its work. The harvests had always been abundant. Takeo assumed that if he simply followed the same methods but applied more care, more attention, more vigilance, his harvests would be even better. In his first spring as sole keeper of the land, Takeo planted his rice with meticulous care. He measured the exact depth of each planting. He counted his steps between rows to ensure perfect spacing. He recorded the amount of water he gave each section of the field. But then the anxiety began. Had he planted the seeds deep enough? Were they getting sufficient water? What if birds had eaten some? What if the spacing wasn't quite right? Each morning, Takeo would wake with his mind already racing through these questions. On the third day after planting, he couldn't bear it any longer. He walked to the corner of his field, knelt down, and carefully dug up one of the seeds to check its progress. It looked unchanged. He buried it again, patting the soil down carefully. The next day, he checked another spot. Then another. Soon he was checking dozens of seeds every morning just to be sure they were developing properly. He told himself he was being thorough, being careful, ensuring success. But the seeds in the sections he kept disturbing began to lag behind the undisturbed areas. Takeo noticed this and grew even more anxious. He must not be checking carefully enough. He must be missing something. He began checking twice a day, morning and evening. His wife, Ayame, watched her husband exhaust himself with this compulsive checking. "Takeo," she said gently one evening as he came in from the fields, mud under his fingernails from digging, "the seeds need time to grow. Your father never dug them up to check." "My father had experience," Takeo replied, washing his hands. "I need to be more careful since I'm just starting." "But you're not being careful," Ayame observed. "You're being anxious. There's a difference." Takeo wanted to argue, but he was too tired. That night, he lay awake, imagining all the things that could go wrong. What if the seeds rotted? What if they dried out? What if his constant checking was somehow harming them? This last thought made him even more anxious, which made him want to check them again to be sure. One morning, Takeo found an old monk named Tenzo walking along the path beside his field. The monk had a walking stick and was moving slowly, appreciating the morning bird song. Takeo recognized him as someone his father had occasionally consulted about the rhythms of nature. "Your father's fields look troubled this year," Tenzo observed, though not unkindly. Takeo felt defensive but curious. "What do you mean?" "Come, walk with me," Tenzo invited. They walked to the edge of the field where the rice was growing. Some sections looked healthy and green. Others looked sparse and struggling. The pattern was clear to Tenzo's experienced eye. "Tell me about your planting," Tenzo said. Takeo explained his careful measurements, his detailed record-keeping, his constant checking to ensure everything was developing properly. Tenzo listened patiently. Then he knelt down and scooped up a handful of soil. "What does the seed do to grow?" he asked. "It sends down roots and sends up a shoot," Takeo answered, wondering where this was going. "And what does the seed need from you to do this?" "Water, sunlight, good soil." "And what does it need from your worry?" Tenzo asked, looking up at Takeo with gentle eyes. Takeo had no answer. "What does it need from your checking and digging and measuring its progress every day?" "I suppose." "Nothing," Takeo admitted quietly. Tenzo stood up, letting the soil fall through his fingers. "The seed already knows how to become rice. Your father understood this. He provided what was needed, then trusted the seed's wisdom. But you keep digging it up, interrupting its work, because you don't trust that growth is happening unless you can see it." "But how can I know it's working if I don't check?" "Can you see your hair growing right now?" Tenzo asked. "No, yet it grows." "Can you feel your fingernails extending?" "No, yet they extend." Growth happens in darkness, in hiddenness, in its own time. When you keep exposing the seed to check its progress, you're not helping. You're preventing the very thing you're trying to encourage. Takeo looked out over his field, seeing now the pattern of his interference. The sections he checked obsessively were the ones that struggled. The sections he had left alone after planting were thriving. "What should I do?" he asked. "Do what's needed. Water, weed, protect from pests. Then practice the hardest part of farming." "What's that?" "Trust," Tenzo said simply. "Trust that the seed is doing its work, even when you can't see it. Trust that growth has its own intelligence. Trust that your constant checking doesn't add to the seed's wisdom, it only disturbs it." That day, Takeo stopped digging up his seeds. It was harder than he expected. His hands itched to check. His mind invented reasons why he needed to verify progress. But each time the urge arose, he would remember Tenzo's words about seeds knowing how to become rice. He turned his attention to the tasks that actually helped, maintaining consistent watering, removing weeds, repairing the irrigation channels. These were active efforts, but they worked with the seed's nature rather than against it. Weeks passed. The rice grew. Takeo noticed that as he stopped interfering, the plants seemed to thrive. More importantly, he noticed that he was sleeping better. The anxiety that had kept him awake, that had driven him to check and recheck, had been exhausting him far more than the physical work of farming. At harvest time, his yield was good in the sections he had left alone, poor in the sections he had disturbed. The lesson was clear. His trying too hard had been the problem, not the solution. Years later, Takeo became known for his peaceful approach to farming. Young farmers would come to him for advice, and he would tell them, "Your job is to provide what's needed and then get out of the way. The seed knows its work. Your worry doesn't help it grow. Your constant checking doesn't add wisdom to what already knows how to become rice." When they asked him how he learned this, he would smile and say, "I learned by trying so hard that I nearly destroyed my first crop." Sometimes the only way to discover the power of not doing is to exhaust yourself with too much doing. This story of Takeo reveals something about the nature of effort itself. His problem wasn't that he cared about his crop or worked hard. The problem was that he confused anxiety with care and interference with help. Takeo's constant checking came from genuine concern. He wanted his rice to grow well. He felt responsible for his inheritance. But his way of expressing that responsibility was to try to control what cannot be controlled. He wanted to manage the seed's growth, to verify its progress, to ensure through his own vigilance that everything went according to plan. What he discovered was that growth has its own intelligence. The seed doesn't need our anxiety to remember how to sprout. It doesn't require our constant verification to know how to send down roots. In fact, our interference can actively harm the very processes we're trying to help. This teaching applies to everything in life. In Zen, there's a principle called Wu Wei, often translated as non-doing or effortless action. This doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing what's needed without the extra layer of force, control, and anxious management that we often add to our efforts. Takeo showed the difference perfectly. Watering the field is appropriate effort. It gives the seeds what they need. Digging them up every day to check their progress is forceful interference. Both come from the same good intention, but one works with the natural process and the other works against it. We do this same thing constantly. We want to grow as people, so we force ourselves through rigid self-improvement that creates more tension than change. We want peace, so we manufacture effort that prevents the natural settling that peace requires. We want love, so we grasp at relationships in ways that push connection away. The seeds Takeo kept disturbing showed him the cost of this approach. Where he interfered most, growth was weakest. Where he provided what was needed and then stepped back, growth was strong. The lesson is clear. Sometimes our trying is exactly what prevents the outcome we seek. The deeper truth here is about trust. Not blind faith, but recognition that there's an intelligence in natural processes that's often wiser than our conscious planning. The seed knows how to become rice. Your body knows how to heal. Relationships know how to deepen when we stop controlling them. Understanding knows how to arise when we stop forcing it. What Takeo learned was to let go of the illusion that his constant checking was helping. His anxiety made him feel like he was doing something important, but it was just anxiety dressed up as care. Real care meant providing what was truly needed, then trusting the process to unfold in its own time. In the capital city, there lived a calligrapher named Misaki, whose work was admired throughout the region. She had studied for years with a master, learning each stroke, understanding composition, developing her skill with the brush. Her characters were elegant and precise, technically flawless. But Misaki had a problem. She couldn't create the one piece that mattered most to her. For 3 years, she had been trying to write a particular poem about the moon reflecting on water. It was a simple poem, only 8 characters, but she wanted the calligraphy to capture the feeling of moonlight, that quality of luminous reflection. She had filled hundreds of sheets with attempts. Each one was technically perfect. The proportions were correct. The balance was right. The inkwork was clean. But none of them had the quality she sought. They looked like good calligraphy. They didn't feel like moonlight. Misaki would spend entire days on this single piece. She would prepare her ink carefully, arrange her paper just so, breathe deeply to steady her hand. Then she would begin, concentrating fiercely on making each stroke perfect. But the harder she tried to capture the feeling of moonlight, the more rigid her characters became. Her husband, a quiet man who made pottery, would watch her destroy sheet after sheet in frustration. "They look beautiful to me," he would say. "They're technically correct," Misaki would reply, "but they have no spirit. They're dead. I can feel how hard I was trying when I look at them." One evening, after a particularly frustrating day where she had ruined 20 sheets, Misaki threw her brush across the room. "I give up," she said. "I've tried everything I know how to try. I can't do it." Her husband picked up the brush and cleaned it carefully. "Maybe that's the problem," he said gently. "What do you mean?" "Maybe you're trying everything you know how to try. Maybe moonlight doesn't come from trying." Misaki wanted to argue, but she was too exhausted. That night, she couldn't sleep, her mind racing through all the ways she had failed to capture what she sought. She watched the real moon through her window, its light spilling across the floor in silver pools. It didn't try to be beautiful. It just was. The next morning, Misaki decided not to work on the piece. She was too tired to try again. Instead, she cleaned her workspace, organized her materials, practiced simple warm-up strokes without any goal. She made tea and sat by her window, watching sparrows fight over seeds in the garden. She wasn't trying to relax or not try or do anything in particular. She was simply tired of the whole project. Her usual fierce intention had worn itself out. In its place was something quieter, less forceful. Late in the afternoon, feeling slightly rested, Misaki prepared her ink out of simple habit. She had no plan to work on the moon poem. She was just doing the familiar motions of her practice, the way her husband might wedge clay without any intention to make a pot. She set out a fresh sheet, though she wasn't sure why. As she lifted her brush, she found herself thinking not about the technique of calligraphy or the goal of capturing moonlight, but simply about moonlight itself. How it feels on your face. How it seems to come from nowhere and everywhere. How it transforms ordinary things into something mysterious. Her hand moved. She wasn't consciously deciding each stroke. It was more like the brush was moving through her, rather than by her. The first character appeared, then the second. She didn't stop to evaluate or judge. She simply continued, staying connected to the feeling of moonlight rather than the technique of capturing it. When she finished the 8th character, she set down her brush and looked at what she had created. There it was. the quality she had sought for 3 years. The characters seemed to glow with their own light. They had space and movement and that mysterious quality of reflection. They felt like moonlight. Her husband came to see what she was working on. When he saw the piece, he drew in a breath. "That's it," he said simply. "Yes," Misaki agreed, still a bit surprised. "But I don't know how I did it." "Maybe because you weren't doing it," he suggested. "Maybe it was doing itself through you." Over the following weeks, Misaki experimented with this discovery. She found that her best work came when she prepared well, but then let go of trying to make something excellent happen. She would connect with the feeling or quality she wanted to express, and then trust her training to emerge through relaxed attention rather than forced effort. This didn't mean she became lazy or careless. Her preparation was still thorough. Her understanding of technique was still deep. But she learned to hold all of this lightly, the way you hold a bird. Grip too tightly and you crush it. Hold too loosely and it flies away. The right touch is firm but gentle, present but not controlling. Students began to seek her teaching, and she found herself trying to explain what she had learned. "Don't try to make beautiful calligraphy," she would tell them. "Make friends with the brush, with the ink, with the paper. Let the characters emerge from relationship rather than from force." "But Master Misaki," one student asked, "how do we learn technique if we don't try hard?" "Learn technique with full effort during practice," Misaki explained. "Train your hand, develop your skill, understand the principles. But when it comes time to create something real, set all that training aside. Trust that it will be there when you need it. Your job is to get out of its way." Years later, Misaki's work was collected by wealthy patrons and hung in temples. When asked about her success, she would say, "I was a much better calligrapher before I learned to try less." Or perhaps it's more accurate to say, "I became a real calligrapher only when I stopped trying to become one." Misaki's journey with her moon poem teaches us about the paradox at the heart of mastery. She needed her years of training. Her technical skill was essential. But that skill could only fully express itself when she stopped trying to use it and instead allowed it to flow naturally. This paradox appears everywhere. Athletes talk about being in the zone, that state where performance arises without conscious effort. Musicians describe moments when the music plays itself through them. Writers speak of getting out of their own way. What all these experiences share is a quality of relaxed attention. There's full presence and engagement, but without the gripping, forcing quality that comes from trying too hard. Misaki's 3 years of frustrated attempts show us what happens when we confuse trying with doing. She was working very hard, concentrating intensely, bringing all her willpower to bear. But this very intensity created rigidity that prevented the quality she sought from emerging. The breakthrough came not when she tried a new technique or developed a better strategy. It came when she was simply too tired to try anymore. In that space of exhaustion, the fierce intention that had been blocking her expression finally relaxed. Her training could emerge naturally because she stopped trying to force it. Her husband's observation that maybe it was doing itself through you points to something profound. When we get ourselves out of the way, there's an intelligence that can flow through us that's often wiser than our conscious planning. This isn't mystical. Our conscious mind can only focus on a few things at once, but our deeper learning and intuition can integrate far more. Be present, but not grasping, engaged but not forcing. Allow the practice to work through you rather than trying to force results through willpower. This is not laziness. It's wisdom about how transformation actually happens. Both Takeo and Misaki discovered the same truth through different experiences. Life knows how to unfold when we stop insisting it follow our timeline and methods. Seeds know how to become rice. Brushes held with relaxed attention know how to make beautiful characters. Understanding knows how to arise when we stop forcing it. This is the wisdom of letting go of force. It's not about becoming passive. It's about learning the difference between appropriate effort and exhausting struggle, between helpful action and anxious interference, between doing what's needed and trying to control what happens naturally on its own. Takeo learned to provide what was needed, then step back. Misaki learned to prepare fully, then let the work happen through her. Both discovered that the trying itself was the obstacle. Not the caring, not the effort, but the grasping quality of trying to make something happen that can only arise when allowed. Master Kenshin had spent 30 years building his monastery. It sat on a hillside overlooking a valley, with carefully tended gardens, a meditation hall with cypress pillars, a library containing hundreds of precious texts, and living quarters for 20 monks. The monastery was known throughout the province as a place of deep practice and genuine learning. Kenshin loved the monastery not for pride or status, but because it served its purpose well. Students could practice in peace here. The gardens provided vegetables for the kitchen. The library offered wisdom from generations of teachers. Everything had been built with care and maintained with devotion. One autumn night, a fire started in the kitchen. A novice had left embers unattended in the cooking stove. By the time anyone noticed, flames were already climbing the walls. The monks formed lines with buckets, but the old wood buildings burned quickly. By dawn, nothing remained but ash and stone foundations. The monks stood in the courtyard as the sun rose, looking at the ruins. Some were crying. Others stood in shocked silence. They had lost not just buildings, but irreplaceable texts, personal belongings, the tools of their craft. Years of careful creation, gone in a single night. Kenshin walked slowly through the remains, his robes covered in soot. His face showed sadness but not despair. When he reached the spot where the meditation hall had stood, he stopped and sat down on a blackened stone. The monks gathered around him, waiting for him to speak. They expected anger, or at least deep grief. Instead, Kenshin looked up at the morning sky, which was particularly beautiful after the smoke had cleared. "Look," he said quietly, gesturing upward. "The sky is still here." The monks looked at him with confusion. Some wondered if the shock had disturbed his mind. "The hills are still here," Kenshin continued, pointing to the valley. "The river still flows. The birds are singing. The sun rose this morning as it always does." "But Master," one monk said, his voice breaking, "everything we built is gone." "Yes," Kenshin agreed. "The buildings are gone. But tell me, what did we actually lose?" The questions seemed absurd. They had lost everything. One monk gestured at the ruins. The meditation hall, the library, our living quarters, years of work. "Those were forms," Kenshin said gently. "They were useful forms, and we will miss them. But they were never what mattered most. What did we really come here to find?" The monks were quiet. They had come seeking peace, understanding, freedom from suffering. They had come to learn to see clearly. Did the fire burn your Buddha nature? Kenshin asked. Did it destroy your capacity for awareness? Did it take away your ability to be present, to be kind, to see through illusion? Slowly, understanding began to dawn on some faces. We built those buildings to support our practice, Kenshin continued. But if we think the buildings were the practice itself, we missed the whole point. We can practice under this sky as well as we could under a roof. Actually, perhaps better, because now there's no confusion about what we're really doing here. He stood up and brushed ash from his robes. Everything that can be destroyed will be destroyed eventually. We knew this in theory. Now we know it in fact. The fire was a teacher. It showed us what remains when everything else burns away. One of the younger monks asked, "But Master, what about all the texts, the teachings written by our lineage masters? Those can never be replaced." Kenshin smiled. If the teachings were only in those books, they weren't really teachings. They were just words on paper. The real teaching is always alive, always being transmitted, always here in this moment. Did you learn nothing from those texts that you can't carry forward? The monk realized he had memorized many passages. More importantly, he had absorbed many principles. The understanding wasn't in the books. It was in him. "We'll rebuild," Kenshin said simply. "But first, we'll practice here in the ruins. We'll learn what it means to have nothing and be free. Then, when we do rebuild, we'll know the difference between what serves practice and what we just thought we needed." In the weeks that followed, life at the monastery continued without buildings. The monks practiced meditation sitting in the open courtyard. They cooked on outdoor fires. They slept under temporary shelters made of branches and cloth. It was uncomfortable at times, but something interesting happened. Without the structure and routine that the buildings had supported, the monks had to be more present to each moment. Without the library to consult, they had to rely on their own understanding. Without the security of solid walls, they had to find security within themselves. Kenshin noticed that some of the monks seemed lighter, freer, more genuinely engaged with practice than they had been when everything was comfortable and established. The fire had burned away not just buildings but also a kind of spiritual complacency. One evening, as they sat around a fire cooking rice, one of the senior monks said, "Master, I thought I would be devastated by this loss, but I feel strangely at peace." "Why is that?" "Because you discovered that what you thought you needed, you didn't actually need," Kenshin replied. "You thought the monastery was the container for your practice. Now you know your practice doesn't need a container. It's always available, always here, regardless of circumstances." "Is this why you seemed so calm when we lost everything?" Another monk asked. "I was sad," Kenshin said honestly. "I loved those buildings. I loved the books. But I wasn't devastated because I never confused them with what they pointed toward. The buildings were fingers pointing at the moon. The fire burned the fingers, but the moon is still there." After several months, the monks did rebuild. But the new monastery was simpler, more functional, less ornate. Kenshin made sure there was no library this time. "Keep the teachings in your hearts," he told them, "where fire cannot reach." The new meditation hall had no walls, just a roof and pillars. "So we never forget," Kenshin explained, "that inside and outside are not separate. That practice happens everywhere, not just in special buildings. Years later, when students from other monasteries visited, they would comment on the unusual openness of the place. Kenshin would tell them about the fire and how it had taught them to hold everything lightly. "We lost everything that could be lost," he would say, and discovered that nothing essential had been touched. That's a teaching worth more than any library. This story of Kenshin and his monks shows us something profound about the nature of loss and what truly matters. When the fire destroyed the monastery, it took away everything the monks had built and accumulated. Yet Kenshin immediately recognized that nothing essential had been lost. His question to the monks was the key: what did we actually lose? The buildings were gone, the books were destroyed, but the capacity for awareness remained. The Buddha nature was untouched. The ability to practice was as present as ever. This points to a fundamental Buddhist teaching about what we really are. We think of ourselves as beings who have awareness, who possess certain qualities and abilities. But Zen teaches that we are awareness itself. Everything else, all our possessions and accomplishments and identities, are temporary forms that arise and pass away. Kenshin saw the difference clearly. The buildings supported practice, but they were not practice itself. The texts contained teachings, but they were not understanding itself. Everything that could burn was, by definition, not essential. His immediate recognition of the sky, the hills, the river, showed where his attention naturally went when the forms fell away. To what remains? To what cannot be destroyed? To the fundamental ground of being that's here, whether we have buildings or not. The image of buildings being fingers pointing at the moon is classic Zen. The teachings, the practices, the structures we create are all meant to point towards something beyond themselves. But we often get so focused on the finger that we never look at what it's pointing toward. The fire forced the monks to see the moon directly. What emerged in the weeks after the fire was telling. Without the comfort and security of established routines, the monks had to find something more fundamental to rely on. Without books to consult, they had to trust their own understanding. Without walls to define practice space, they had to recognize that all space is practice space. This discomfort actually served their awakening. The buildings had been creating a kind of spiritual comfort that was also a kind of spiritual sleep. With that comfort removed, the monks had to wake up to what practice really is. This is what it means to have empty hands and a full heart. Empty hands because we're not grasping at forms, not trying to hold on to what must change. Full heart because when we let go of clinging, we discover that we already have everything essential. We are the awareness in which all forms appear and disappear. That awareness itself is complete, lacking nothing. The new monastery they built, simpler and more open, reflected their changed understanding. They no longer needed to create a special sacred space separate from the world. They had learned that practice happens everywhere, in all circumstances, because the awareness that practices is not dependent on conditions. Not because you don't care. The monks cared deeply about their monastery. But because you recognize that what you truly are, what gives you the capacity for peace and presence, doesn't depend on what you hold. There was a young potter named Yuki who had recently completed her apprenticeship with a master ceramicist. She had learned every technique, studied every glaze, understood the principles of form and function. Her master declared her ready to work independently, and Yuki set up her own small workshop on the edge of town. For her first independent piece, Yuki wanted to create something extraordinary. She had in mind a particular tea bowl, one that would demonstrate everything she had learned and establish her reputation as a serious artist. She sketched it carefully, planned every detail, mixed her clay with perfect proportions. She threw the bowl on her wheel with skill and precision. The form was exactly as she had envisioned. She trimmed it carefully, let it dry to leather hardness, then applied a glaze she had been developing for months. The color would be extraordinary, she was certain of it. With great ceremony, she placed the bowl in her kiln and started the fire. According to all her training, the firing would take 3 days. 3 days of carefully maintained temperature, of gradual heating and cooling, of patience while transformation occurred in the darkness of the kiln. But Yuki found herself unable to wait. On the first day, she opened the kiln door just a crack to peek inside. The bowl looked unchanged. She closed the door quickly, worried she had disrupted the process. On the second day, she opened it again, just to check. Still no visible transformation. By the third day, she was consumed with curiosity and anxiety. What if the glaze hadn't worked? What if something had gone wrong? What if she had wasted all this effort on a piece that would be ruined? She needed to know. She opened the kiln completely, several hours before the proper time. Cool air rushed into the hot interior. She reached in with tongs and pulled out the bowl. The moment the cold air hit the hot clay, she heard a sound like a sigh. A crack appeared, running from rim to base. Then another. Within seconds, her perfect bowl had split into pieces. Yuki sat on the floor of her workshop, holding the broken bowl, and wept. Months of planning, days of work, all destroyed because she couldn't wait a few more hours. She knew better. Her master had warned her 1,000 times about the importance of patience in firing. But knowing and doing were different things. The next morning, her old master, Jiro, came to visit. He had heard about Yuki setting up her own workshop and wanted to see how she was doing. He found her sitting among the pieces of her broken bowl, her eyes red from crying. "Tell me what happened," Jiro said gently. Yuki explained everything. The careful planning, the perfect execution, and then her inability to wait. "I ruined it," she said. "I knew I should wait, but I couldn't stand not knowing what was happening inside the kiln." Jiro picked up one of the broken pieces and examined it. "What were you afraid would happen if you waited the full time?" "That it might be ruined and I would have wasted all that effort." "So instead, you ruined it yourself to avoid the possibility that it might be ruined?" Jiro asked, not unkindly. Yuki heard the absurdity in this when it was said aloud. She had destroyed her own work, trying to protect it from possible failure. "Tell me," Jiro continued, "when the bowl was in the kiln, were you with it?" "No, I was out here, worrying." "So, while the transformation was happening, you were absent from it, lost in your worry about what might be happening?" Yuki nodded. "And now that you've opened the kiln too early, are you present to what is?" Yuki looked at the broken bowl in her hands and realized she was still lost in thoughts about what should have been, what could have been. She wasn't even fully experiencing this moment of loss. "The kiln teaches what life teaches," Jiro said. "Transformation happens in its own time, in darkness, out of our sight. We can't rush it. We can't check on it every moment. We have to provide the right conditions and then trust the process. Our job is to wait well." "What does it mean to wait well?" Yuki asked. To be present while waiting. To trust while not knowing. To let time do its work without interference. Jiro set down the broken piece. You weren't really waiting. You were suffering your impatience. There's a difference. Over the following weeks, Jiro visited Yuki often, teaching her what he called the art of waiting. He showed her that waiting wasn't passive, but active. It required consciousness, presence, and trust. When you put a bowl in the kiln, he explained, you're not doing nothing while it fires. You're maintaining temperature, tending the fire, being present to the process even though you can't see inside. That's active waiting. He taught her to notice the difference between anxious checking and aware attending. Anxious checking came from lack of trust and made the time feel longer. Aware attending came from understanding the process and made the time feel natural. Yuki made another bowl. This one was simpler, less ambitious. She prepared it carefully and placed it in the kiln. Then, instead of pacing and worrying, she sat near the kiln and practiced what Jiro taught. She felt the heat radiating from the bricks. She listened to the sound of the fire. She trusted that in the darkness, transformation was happening. When the proper time came to open the kiln, she felt calm. Whether the bowl succeeded or failed, she had done her part. She had waited well. The outcome would be what it would be. She opened the kiln and pulled out the bowl. It was beautiful. The glaze had worked perfectly, creating colors and patterns she had only imagined. But more important than the beauty of the bowl was what Yuki had learned in the making of it. I understand now, she told Jiro. The waiting itself was part of the creation. My impatience wasn't just uncomfortable. It was actively working against what I was trying to make. Yes, Jiro agreed. In pottery, in practice, in life, things ripen in their own time. We can't pull fruit from the tree before it's ready and expect it to be sweet. We can't open the kiln early and expect the transformation to be complete. Wisdom is knowing when to act and when to wait. Years later, Yuki became known not just for her pottery, but for her unusual presence. Students noticed that she never seemed rushed, never seemed impatient. When they asked her secret, she would show them a small broken bowl she kept on a shelf. This bowl taught me more than any success ever did, she would say. It taught me that some things can't be rushed. That transformation happens in darkness and time. That my job isn't to control the outcome, but to provide good conditions and then wait with trust. Yuki's story shows us something essential about how change actually happens. Whether we're firing pottery, growing crops, healing wounds, or developing understanding, there are processes that simply need time. Our impatience doesn't speed them up. Often, it disrupts them. Her opening of the kiln too early is such a clear image of what we do constantly. We know intellectually that something needs time, but we can't bear the not knowing. So we interfere, we check, we try to speed things up, or at least see what's happening. And often, this very interference prevents the transformation we're trying to achieve. The Buddha spoke often about patience as one of the essential qualities for awakening. Not passive waiting, but active trust in the process of unfolding. In traditional Buddhism, this quality is called khanti, often translated as patience or forbearance, but it means something deeper than just enduring time passing. Jiro's question about what Yuki was afraid of gets to the heart of impatience. Usually we're not impatient because time itself is uncomfortable. We're impatient because we don't trust the process. We're afraid something might be going wrong that we need to fix. We're anxious about outcomes we can't control. The distinction Jiro made between waiting and suffering impatience is crucial. Waiting well isn't about gritting your teeth and forcing yourself to endure time passing. It's about being present to the process, trusting that transformation is happening even when you can't see it. Think about how often we do what Yuki did. We start something that requires time, then we can't stand the waiting. We check our progress obsessively. We measure constantly. We look for signs that it's working. And all this checking becomes a kind of interference that works against the natural unfolding. A seed knows how to become a plant, but if we keep digging it up to see if it's growing, we'll prevent that growth. Understanding knows how to develop, but if we keep checking whether we're making progress, we interrupt the natural deepening. Peace knows how to arise, but if we keep evaluating whether we're peaceful yet, we maintain the very agitation we're trying to release. This is one of the paradoxes of practice. The transformation we seek often requires a kind of stepping back, a trust that it will happen if we provide good conditions and then get out of the way. But stepping back is hard when we don't trust the process. This attending is what makes waiting active rather than passive. You're not absent or distracted. You're present to the process, even the parts you can't see. You're trusting without being careless. You're allowing without being indifferent. The broken bowl that Yuki kept on her shelf served as a reminder of what impatience costs. Not just the ruined work, but the peace that's lost when we can't trust time. Impatience isn't just uncomfortable. It actively works against what we're trying to achieve. In Zen practice, this teaching about patience appears in many forms. Students are told that enlightenment can't be rushed. That understanding ripens in its own time. That forcing spiritual progress creates obstacles rather than removing them. The practice itself is learning to sit in the darkness of not knowing, trusting that transformation is happening even when we can't see or measure it. This applies to everything. Relationships need time to deepen. Grief needs time to process. Skills need time to develop. Understanding needs time to mature. We can provide good conditions for all of these, but we can't force them to happen faster than they naturally unfold. What we can do is learn to wait well, to be present without controlling, to trust without being able to see what's happening, to allow time to do its work without our constant interference. This is one of the deepest forms of letting go. Not just letting go of things, but letting go of our need to control timing. Letting go of our demand that things ripen according to our schedule rather than their natural pace. In a valley known for its rice, there lived a farmer named Daichi who had inherited his land from his father and his father before him. The family had farmed this same land for generations, and Daichi knew its rhythms as well as he knew his own breathing. But one spring, everything seemed wrong to Daichi. The previous year's harvest had been poor due to unexpected floods. His family's savings were low. His eldest daughter was to be married, and he needed money for the wedding. The pressure made him anxious in a way he had never felt before about farming. When it came time to plant the rice, Daichi found himself second-guessing everything. Should he plant earlier to try to get ahead of the season? Should he use different seed varieties that might grow faster? Should he space the plants differently to maximize yield? His wife, Hannah, watched him fret over these decisions. "You've planted rice for 20 years, she observed. "Why are you suddenly uncertain?" "Because this year it matters more," Daichi replied. "We need a good harvest. I can't afford to just trust and hope for the best." But that was exactly what farming had always required: trust and hope. Trust that the seasons would follow their pattern. Hope that the rice would grow as it always had. Daichi knew this, but his anxiety made him forget what he knew. He planted according to the old schedule because in the end he couldn't think of a better plan. But once the seeds were in the ground, his worry intensified. Each morning he would walk the fields looking for signs of germination. Nothing. The earth looked exactly as it had the day after planting. A week passed. Still nothing visible. Daichi began to panic. Were the seeds bad? Had he planted wrong? Should he replant? He went to his neighbor, old Kenji, who had been farming even longer than Daichi's family. "The seeds aren't sprouting," Daichi said urgently. "It's been a week. Should I dig up a section and check?" Kenji looked at Daichi with quiet amusement. "Has it been warm enough?" "Yes, the temperature has been right." "Has there been rain?" "Yes, enough, but not too much." "Then the seeds are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. They're swelling, sending down roots, preparing to sprout. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean nothing is happening." "But what if something's wrong?" Kenji sat down on a bench near his own fields. "Daichi, how many times have you planted rice?" 20 springs. "And how many times has it grown?" "Every time," Daichi admitted. "So why would this year be different?" "Because I need it to work," Daichi said, and heard the absurdity in his own words. His needing it to work didn't change how rice grew. His anxiety didn't make the seeds sprout faster or slower. The natural process would unfold in its own time, regardless of his feelings about it. "Your father taught you something important," Kenji said gently. "He taught you that farming is partnership with nature, not control over nature. You do your part, prepare the soil, plant at the right time, provide water. Then you wait. Not passively, not anxiously, but with trust in the process that's been working for thousands of years." Daichi sat with his neighbor in silence for a while, watching the wind move across Kenji's fields where rice was already showing green shoots. Those fields had been planted a week before his own. In 7 days, his fields would look like this. He needed to trust time. Over the following weeks, Daichi practiced what he came to think of as farmer's faith. Not blind belief that everything would turn out perfectly, but trust in the basic process. Rain would come. Sun would shine. Seeds would sprout when conditions were right, not when he wanted them to. He still checked the fields daily, but the quality of his checking changed. Instead of anxious searching for problems, he practiced simple observation. Instead of trying to speed things up with his worry, he learned to appreciate each stage. The soil preparing, the first green shoots, the gradual thickening of growth. One morning, about 10 days after planting, he saw the first tiny green tips pushing through the soil. His heart filled with something like relief and something like shame. Relief that the rice was growing. Shame that he had doubted the process he knew so well. Hannah found him standing at the edge of the field, just watching the early growth. "The rice doesn't care about our worries," she said, joining him. It grows according to its nature, not our needs. I know that, Daichi replied. I've always known it. But this year I forgot. What made you remember? Kenji reminded me that I've done this 20 times before. That trust isn't blind hope. It's based on understanding how things actually work. Rice grows in its own time. My rushing doesn't help. My worry doesn't change anything. The season progressed as seasons do. There were challenges, a week of too much rain, then a week of too little. Insects that needed managing. Weeds that needed pulling. But Daichi met each challenge as it came, without the overlay of panic he had felt at the beginning. At harvest time, the yield was good. Not exceptional, but good. Enough for the wedding, enough to rebuild savings. But what Daichi valued most from that season wasn't the rice. It was what he had learned about trust and timing. The evening after harvest, Kenji came by to help celebrate. Daichi thanked him for the wisdom he had shared back in spring. I didn't teach you anything new, Kenji said. You already knew it. You just needed reminding that some things work in their own time, and our job is to work with that time, not against it. But how do you keep remembering it? Daichi asked. How do you not panic when you can't see what's happening underground? Kenji smiled. I remember that I've seen spring turn into summer, into fall, into harvest 100 times. Each time, I'm tempted to think, this time will be different. This time, I need to control it. And each time, the seasons prove me wrong. They do their work whether I trust them or not. But my life is better when I do trust them. Years later, when Daichi's own son began farming the land, Daichi would tell him about that spring of worry and what it taught. You'll be tempted to think you can control everything, he would say. But farming teaches what life teaches. Some things ripen in their own time. Your job is to provide what's needed and then trust the process. The seasons don't hurry because you're impatient. They don't slow because you're anxious. They follow their own rhythm. Learning to move with that rhythm instead of fighting it, that's the real skill of farming. Daichi's story shows us how easily we forget what we know when anxiety takes hold. He had 20 years of evidence that rice grows in its time, yet his worry about the harvest made him doubt the entire process. This is what anxiety does. It makes us forget what we understand about how things naturally unfold. His need for a good harvest didn't change how rice grows. His worry didn't make seeds sprout faster. His checking didn't alter the underground process. Yet he felt compelled to do something, to manage, to control. This is the impulse that makes waiting so difficult. The feeling that we should be doing more, checking more, ensuring more. Kenji's simple questions helped Daichi see what he was doing. By asking about all his previous plantings, Kenji reminded him of the foundation for trust. Trust isn't blind faith. It's based on understanding patterns, on knowing how things work, on experience of cycles repeating. This is what the Buddha meant by trust in the Dharma. Not belief in something unseen, but confidence in the natural law of cause and effect. If you plant seeds in good soil, provide water and sunlight, they will grow. Not because you believe hard enough, but because that's what seeds do. The trust is in the nature of things, not in hope or wishful thinking. Daichi's shift from anxious checking to simple observation shows what it means to wait well. He still visited the fields daily. He still paid attention. but the quality of attention changed from trying to control to simply witnessing. From demanding that things be different to appreciating what is. The insight that rice doesn't care about our worries might seem obvious, but it's profound. Most of our anxiety comes from the illusion that our worrying matters to the process. We think if we worry enough, plan enough, check enough, we can influence outcomes. But natural processes unfold according to their own laws, not according to our emotional state. The teaching about seasons following their own rhythm applies to every aspect of life. Healing takes time. Understanding deepens gradually. Relationships develop in stages. Skills mature through practice. We can't rush these processes any more than we can make rice grow faster by worrying about it. What we can do is what Daichi learned. Provide good conditions, then trust the natural unfolding. Our job is to work with time, not against it. To move with natural rhythms instead of trying to impose our own schedule. This is another dimension of letting go. Not just releasing what we're clinging to, but releasing our demand that things happen according to our timeline. Letting go of the illusion that our impatience changes anything except our own peace of mind. Kenji's 100 springs of experience taught him what can only be learned through repeated cycles, that natural processes are reliable. Not always predictable in every detail, but reliable in their basic patterns. Spring follows winter. Seeds become plants. Time does its work, whether we trust it or not. The difference is in how we experience the waiting. When Daichi was anxious and controlling, the waiting was torture. When he learned to trust the process, the same waiting became a kind of rest. The time was the same. The process was the same. Only his relationship to it changed. This is the wisdom both Yuki and Daichi discovered, that how we wait matters more than we realize. We can wait while suffering, or we can wait while trusting. We can fill the time with anxiety, or we can fill it with presence. The outcome unfolds in its own time either way, but our experience of that time transforms completely. Both pottery and farming teach what Zen practice teaches, that transformation happens in darkness and time, out of our sight and beyond our control. Our part is to provide what's needed, then step back and let the natural intelligence of the process do its work. When we can do this, we discover a kind of peace that doesn't depend on being able to see or control what's happening. A peace that comes from trust in the way things naturally unfold. In a village at the foot of a mountain, there lived a healer named Mariko who had studied medicine with the best teachers in the province. She knew every herb, every treatment, every technique for dealing with common ailments. People came from distant villages to seek her help, and many credited her with saving their lives. Mariko took her work seriously. She believed that healing was about precision, about applying the right treatment at the right time with skill and care. She kept detailed records of every patient, every remedy, every outcome. When people got better, she analyzed what she had done right. When they didn't improve as expected, she studied what she might have done differently. One autumn, a man named Tomo came to her with a persistent cough that wouldn't respond to any treatment. Mariko gave him herbs to clear the lungs. The cough continued. She adjusted the formula, adding different ingredients. The cough persisted. She tried acupuncture, moxibustion, dietary changes. Nothing worked. Mariko became increasingly frustrated. She had never failed to help someone with such a straightforward condition. Coughs were basic problems. She knew how to treat them. Why wasn't this one responding? She increased the frequency of treatments. She made Tomo's remedies stronger. She gave him strict instructions about what to eat, how to sleep, when to rest. But the cough continued, and Mariko felt her reputation as a healer was at stake. One day, Master Gyokei, an old monk known for his wisdom, came to the village. He had known Mariko since she was young and had always admired her dedication. But when he visited her this time, he found her exhausted and distressed. "What troubles you?" he asked. Mariko explained about Tomo and the cough that wouldn't heal. "I've tried everything I know," she said. "I'm doing everything right, but he's not getting better. I don't understand why I can't fix this." "Ah," Gyokei said thoughtfully. "You believe you fix people?" "Well, yes. I'm a healer. That's my job." "Show me your hands," Gyokei requested. Mariko held out her hands, confused. They were the hands of a healer, clean, steady, skilled. "These hands," Gyokei said, "they are tools. They prepare medicine, they place needles, they mix herbs. But do they heal? They help the healing happen." "But who does the healing?" Mariko paused. "The body heals itself. I just provide what it needs." "Then why are you so upset that you can't fix this man's cough?" The question caught Mariko off guard. She realized she had been thinking of healing as something she did to people, not something she supported their bodies in doing for themselves. She had been trying to control the outcome through perfect application of technique. "Come with me," Gyokei said. They walked to where Tomo lived. Gyokei asked if he could speak with the man, and Tomo invited them to sit. For a while, Gyokei just talked with Tomo about his life, his work as a carpenter, his family. Gradually, the conversation turned to the cough. "When did it start?" Gyokei asked. "About 3 months ago. Right after my son left for the capital to work." "Your only son?" "Yes. The house feels very empty now. Just my wife and me after all these years of a full home." They talked more, and it emerged that Tomo barely slept anymore, lying awake worrying about his son in the big city. He had lost his appetite. He felt tired all the time but couldn't rest. After they left Tomo's house, Gyokei turned to Mariko. "What did you hear?" "That he's grieving," Mariko said slowly. "That he's stressed and not sleeping." "And can your herbs fix grief?" "No. But they should still help the cough." "Should they?" "His body is expressing what his heart can't say. He's coughing up the words he can't speak, the loneliness he can't name. You've been treating the cough as if it was separate from the man, as if you could fix one part while the rest of him suffers." Mariko felt something shift in her understanding. She had been so focused on controlling the symptom that she had missed the person. She had been trying to force healing instead of supporting it. The next time Tomo came for treatment, Mariko approached it differently. Instead of immediately giving him medicine, she sat with him and listened. She learned more about his son, about his adjustment to an empty house, about his fears and his loneliness. "The cough," she finally said, "is your body asking for attention. Not just medical attention, but your attention to what you're feeling. They talked about grief, about change, about learning to live with emptiness. Mariko still gave him herbs, but gentler ones now, for support rather than control. She suggested he write letters to his son. She encouraged him to visit friends instead of sitting alone in his empty house. Over several weeks, the cough gradually eased. Not because Mariko had found the right formula, but because Tomo had begun to address what his body was trying to tell him. The healing happened not through Mariko's control, but through her stepping back and allowing the natural process to unfold. Months later, Master Gyoke visited again and found Mariko changed. She was calmer, less driven, but somehow more effective. Her patients seemed to heal better than before. "What did you learn?" he asked. "That I'm not in control of healing," Mariko said. "That I never was. My job isn't to fix people, but to support their own healing capacity. To provide what might help and then trust the body's wisdom. When I stopped trying to control outcomes, I became a better healer because I could finally see what was actually needed. And this doesn't frighten you? Not being in control?" Mariko smiled. "It's actually a relief. I was exhausted trying to manage what couldn't be managed. Now I do my part with care, then step back and trust. Some people heal, some don't. Some quickly, some slowly. I can't control that, but I can be present to whatever unfolds." Years later, when younger healers came to study with Mariko, they noticed something different about her approach. She didn't seem as urgent as other teachers, less driven to prove her methods worked. When they asked about this, she would tell them about Tomo and the cough that wouldn't respond. "I learned that healing has its own intelligence," she would explain. "Your job is to listen, to support, to provide what might help. But then you have to let go. You can't force a body to heal any more than you can force a plant to grow. The trying to control is often what prevents the natural healing from happening." Mariko's story reveals something fundamental about the illusion of control. She was skilled, knowledgeable, well-intentioned. But her very attempt to control the outcome was preventing her from seeing what was actually needed. She was so focused on fixing the symptom that she missed the whole person. Her belief that she could fix Tomo's cough was based on the idea that she was in control of healing. But Gyoke's question, "Who does the healing?" pointed to the truth: bodies heal themselves. Healers can support, assist, provide conditions that help. But the actual healing comes from the body's own intelligence. This is true far beyond medicine. We think we're in control of outcomes in our lives, our work, our relationships. We believe that if we just try hard enough, plan well enough, manage carefully enough, we can make things turn out the way we want. But this is largely illusion. The Buddha taught about the 3 marks of existence: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Part of what non-self means is that we're not the independent controllers of reality that we think we are. We're participants in a vast web of interdependent causes and conditions, most of which are beyond our influence. Mariko was trying to control something that responded to factors she couldn't control: Tomo's grief, his loneliness, his body's way of expressing what his heart couldn't say. No amount of technical skill could address these deeper issues. She needed to let go of control to actually be helpful. Her shift from trying to fix to supporting healing was profound. Instead of seeing Tomo as a problem to solve, she began to see him as a person going through a process. Instead of imposing her will through stronger treatments, She learned to listen to what his body was trying to communicate. This is the wisdom of Wu Wei again, but applied to helping others. The most effective action often comes not from forcing outcomes, but from working with natural processes. Mariko became a better healer when she stopped trying to be in control and started supporting what was already trying to happen. The relief she felt at not being in control anymore is significant. The illusion of control is exhausting. When we think we're responsible for managing outcomes, we carry an impossible burden. Every failure feels personal. Every setback feels like our fault. We're constantly monitoring, adjusting, trying to keep everything moving in the right direction. But when we recognize that we're not actually in control, that our role is more modest, a weight lifts. We can do our part skillfully and carefully, then let go of the outcome. We're still responsible for our actions, but not for results that depend on countless factors beyond our influence. This doesn't mean becoming passive or careless. Mariko still brought skill and knowledge to her work, but she no longer confused her actions with the results. She provided support and let healing happen in its own way and time. Gyokei's teaching about the body expressing what the heart can't say points to something deeper, that we're unified beings, not separate parts that can be fixed independently. Mariko had been treating the cough as isolated from everything else about Tomo. This fragmented approach is part of the illusion of control, the belief that we can manage individual pieces without attending to the whole. When Mariko began seeing Tomo as a whole person going through a difficult transition, she could finally respond to what was actually happening rather than what she thought should be happening. She stopped trying to impose her plan for healing and started supporting Tomo's own process of working through his grief. This is what letting go of control looks like in practice. Not abandoning skill or care, but releasing the illusion that we can manage outcomes. Not becoming indifferent, but recognizing the limits of our influence. Not giving up, but giving over to the natural intelligence of processes larger than our individual will. We spend enormous energy trying to control what can't be controlled. Our health, other people's choices, the future, outcomes that depend on countless variables we can't see or influence. This effort exhausts us and often prevents the natural unfolding that would happen if we stopped interfering. The practice is to keep doing what's skillful while releasing attachment to outcomes, to provide good conditions and trust the process, to act with care but without the burden of believing we're in charge of results. This is freedom. Not freedom from responsibility for our actions, but freedom from the impossible responsibility of controlling the universe. In a provincial capital, there lived an official named Hideyoshi who had risen through the ranks of government service through careful planning and meticulous management. He was known for his ability to organize complex projects, solve administrative problems, and keep everything running smoothly. Hideyoshi believed deeply in preparation and planning. For every situation, he had a plan. For every problem, he had a solution ready. For every possible difficulty, he had already thought through the response. His colleagues admired his thoroughness, though some found him rigid. When he was appointed to oversee disaster preparedness for his region, Hideyoshi threw himself into the work with his characteristic intensity. He studied flood patterns, earthquake histories, fire risks. He created detailed plans for every conceivable emergency. He drilled his staff on procedures until they could recite them in their sleep. He felt satisfied that his region was now prepared for anything. Whatever might happen, he had a plan to manage it. Then the earthquake came. It struck just before dawn on a spring morning. The shaking lasted less than a minute, but it felt like hours. Buildings collapsed. Fires started. Water systems broke. The careful order Hideyoshi had worked so hard to establish dissolved in seconds. In the aftermath, Hideyoshi pulled out his disaster plans, ready to implement them. But nothing went as planned. The roads his evacuees were supposed to use were blocked with rubble. The water sources he had designated were contaminated. The meeting points he had established were now dangerous locations. His careful plans were useless in the face of actual disaster. He stood in the street outside his damaged office, holding his thick folder of plans, and realized they were just paper. All his preparation had given him the illusion of control, but the actual earthquake followed no one's plan. Reality didn't care about his procedures. A monk named Sengai was helping clear rubble from a collapsed temple nearby. He noticed Hideyoshi standing frozen and came over to see if he needed help. "My plans are worthless," Hideyoshi said, still in shock. "Everything I prepared for isn't what actually happened. I thought I had everything under control, but I controlled nothing." Sengai looked at the plans in Hideyoshi's hands. "Did you expect the earthquake to follow your planning?" "I expected my planning to help manage the earthquake." "And is anyone being helped right now?" Hideyoshi looked around. People were digging through rubble, carrying water, tending the injured. The help was happening, just not according to any plan. People were responding to what was actually needed in each moment, not following procedures. "Come," Sengai said. "Put down your plans and help move this beam. There's someone trapped underneath." For the next several days, Hideyoshi worked without plans. When he saw someone needed help, he helped. When a problem arose, he responded as best he could with what was available. When someone asked what to do, he said, "Let's see what's needed here right now." It was terrifying at first, working without his careful procedures. But gradually, he noticed something surprising. Things were getting done. People were being helped. The community was recovering. Not according to any master plan, but through countless small acts of response to immediate needs. A week after the earthquake, Sengai found Hideyoshi organizing a food distribution point. Not from a plan, but from seeing people were hungry and food was arriving from other regions. "You look different," Sengai observed. "I feel different. I spent years trying to prepare for everything, thinking I could control disaster through planning. But disaster teaches that control is illusion. The only real skill is responding to what's actually here." "So your planning was wasted?" Hideyoshi considered this. "No, it taught me about systems, about logistics, about needs. That knowledge is useful. But I was confused about what planning could do. I thought it could control outcomes. Really, it can only prepare me to respond better when things don't go as planned." "Which is always," Sengai added with a slight smile. "Yes. Things never go as planned. There are too many variables, too many unknowns. My job isn't to control events, but to meet them skillfully as they arise." In the months of rebuilding, Hideyoshi became known for a different kind of leadership. He still prepared and organized, but without the rigid attachment to plans. When situations changed, he changed with them. When reality didn't match expectations, he worked with reality rather than trying to force it to match his vision. His colleagues noticed that he seemed less stressed, more effective. paradoxically, by letting go of control, he became better at his work. Years later, when training new officials, Hideyoshi would tell them about the earthquake. "You'll be tempted to think that good planning means controlling outcomes," he would say. But planning is just thinking ahead. It can't control reality. Reality will always surprise you. Your real skill isn't in making things go according to plan. It's in responding wisely when they don't. He would show them his old disaster plans, the ones that had been useless during the actual disaster. These aren't worthless because they were bad plans. They're worthless because I thought they could control what happened. Once I let go of that illusion, the knowledge in them became useful in a different way, as preparation for response, not control of outcomes. Hideyoshi's story shows the illusion of control from another angle. His planning wasn't bad. His preparation was actually valuable. But he had confused preparation with control. He thought that by planning for every possibility, he could manage what happened. The earthquake showed him how little we actually control. This is one of life's hardest lessons, that we can do everything right and still not control outcomes. We can prepare thoroughly and still be surprised. We can work skillfully and still have things turn out differently than we hoped. Our sense of control is mostly illusion. The Buddha taught about this through the concept of dependent origination. Everything arises from countless causes and conditions, most of which are beyond our sight or influence. We can affect some conditions, but we can't control the whole web of causation. To think we can is to misunderstand our actual position in reality. Hideyoshi's rigid attachment to his plans was a form of suffering. He had worked so hard to create the illusion of control that when reality shattered that illusion, he felt lost. All his effort had been directed towards something impossible, controlling a complex, dynamic, unpredictable reality. Sengai's simple request to put down the plans and help move rubble was profound. It invited Hideyoshi to shift from trying to control what was happening to responding to what was needed right now. From managing reality according to his vision to meeting reality as it actually was. The terrifying freedom of working without plans taught Hideyoshi something essential. When he stopped trying to control outcomes and started responding to what was actually present, he discovered a different kind of effectiveness. Not the effectiveness of imposing order, but the effectiveness of working with what's here. His realization that things never go as planned is worth sitting with. We spend enormous energy trying to make reality match our plans, our expectations, our ideas about how things should be. But reality doesn't consult our plans. It unfolds according to its own laws. Our plans can help us think ahead, but they can't control what happens. The shift from planning as control to planning as preparation is subtle but crucial. Preparation means developing knowledge and skills that might be useful. Control means trying to dictate outcomes. Preparation is humble. Control is arrogant. Preparation works with reality. Control tries to dominate it. Hideyoshi's decreased stress and increased effectiveness after letting go of control shows the practical benefit of this realization. The burden of trying to control what can't be controlled is exhausting. When we release that impossible task and focus instead on responding skillfully to what's actually here, we free up enormous energy. This doesn't mean we stop preparing or planning. Both Mariko and Hideyoshi continued their work. But they no longer confused their actions with control over outcomes. They did their part, then let reality unfold as it would. This is the wisdom of acting without attachment to results. The illusion of control creates suffering in countless ways. We think we should be able to manage our health, so illness feels like failure. We think we should be able to control others' choices, so their independence feels like rejection. We think we should be able to prevent bad things from happening, so when they do, we blame ourselves. But most of what happens is beyond our control. We live in a web of interdependence where countless factors influence every outcome. We can affect some factors through our actions, but we can't control the whole pattern. The practice is to keep doing what's skillful, what's caring, what's wise, while releasing the illusion that we're in charge of results. To act responsibly without carrying the impossible burden of controlling reality. To prepare well, then meet what comes with presence and flexibility rather than rigid attachment to how things should be. This is true letting go. Not of effort or care or skill, but of the exhausting illusion that we're in control. When we release this illusion, we find a freedom that allows us to respond more effectively to whatever arises. We're no longer fighting to make reality match our plans. We're meeting reality as it is and working with it skillfully. Both Mariko and Hideyoshi discovered that letting go of control didn't make them less effective. It made them more effective because they could finally see and respond to what was actually present rather than trying to force their vision onto reality. The peace they found wasn't in getting better at controlling outcomes. It was in releasing the need to control them at all. There was a scholar named Kaito who lived alone in a small house at the edge of a university town. He had devoted his life to learning, earning respect for his knowledge of ancient texts and philosophy. But despite his accomplishments, Kaito felt a persistent loneliness that nothing seemed to ease. He would see other scholars gathering in tea houses, talking late into the night. He would watch students walking together, laughing at shared jokes. He felt, on the outside of something essential, looking in at a warmth he couldn't reach. To fill the emptiness, Kaito threw himself deeper into his studies. He told himself that companionship was a distraction from serious work. He acquired more books, spent longer hours in research, gained more recognition for his scholarship. Yet the loneliness only grew more intense. One day, a monk named Basui came to town to give lectures on Zen. Kaito attended out of intellectual curiosity, not expecting any personal relevance. But during the questions at the end, Kaito found himself speaking. "Master Basui," he said, "I have a question about suffering. The Buddha taught that desire causes suffering. I desire companionship, deep connection with others. Should I try to eliminate this desire?" Basui looked at Kaito with penetrating kindness. "Tell me more about this desire." "I feel alone," Kaito said, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "I watch others form friendships easily, but I can't. I've tried to stop wanting connection, to be content with my studies, but the longing only grows stronger." "And when you're with other people, what happens?" Basui asked. "I become anxious. I worry about saying the right thing, appearing knowledgeable. I analyze every conversation afterward, finding all my mistakes. It's exhausting." "So you desire connection, but when connection is available, you're busy protecting yourself?" Kaito paused. He had never thought of it this way. "I suppose so." "Your desire for companionship isn't the problem," Basui said gently. "Your desire is trying to tell you something. What are you afraid would happen if you truly let someone close. That night, Kaito couldn't stop thinking about the question. What was he afraid of? As he sat with the question, memories arose. His father's criticism, classmates mocking his earnest questions, teachers impatient with his confusion. A pattern emerged. He had learned early that being known was dangerous. So he had built walls of scholarship, using knowledge to keep people at a safe distance. The longing for connection wasn't separate from his fear of it. They were two sides of the same wound. He desired what he was too afraid to allow. Over the following weeks, Kaito began to see his desire differently. Not as a problem to eliminate, but as a message pointing towards something unhealed. His loneliness was showing him where he had closed himself off. His longing was inviting him toward the very vulnerability he feared. Basui had suggested Kaito attend a weekly gathering where people practiced meditation together. Kaito resisted at first. What if they found him inadequate? What if he didn't fit in? But the loneliness was becoming unbearable, so he went. The first evening was uncomfortable. Kaito wanted to impress the group with his knowledge of meditation theory, but Basui gently redirected him to simple practice. Just sitting, just breathing, just being present. No performance required. After meditation, people shared tea and casual conversation. Kaito's instinct was to lecture about the philosophy behind tea ceremonies, but he caught himself. Instead, he asked someone about their day. He listened without planning his next comment. He let himself not know, not impress, not manage. It felt vulnerable and uncomfortable. It also felt alive in a way his isolated scholarship never had. Over months of attending, Kaito gradually learned to let people see him. Not the impressive scholar, but the actual person who got nervous, who didn't always understand, who sometimes felt lost. To his surprise, this vulnerability didn't drive people away. It invited them closer. One evening, after the group had dissolved into easy conversation, Kaito realized the longing had eased. Not because he had eliminated desire, but because he had finally listened to what the desire was trying to teach him. It wasn't really about wanting friends. It was about needing to heal the fear that kept him isolated. When Basui visited the group some weeks later, Kaito thanked him. "You showed me that my desire wasn't the enemy. It was pointing toward what needed attention." Yes, Basui agreed. We often try to eliminate desires when we should be listening to them. They're messengers, not enemies. Your loneliness was showing you where healing was needed. When you learned to see it this way, it became a teacher instead of torture. But the Buddha taught about overcoming desire, Kaito said. The Buddha taught about seeing through desire, Basui corrected. Seeing what it's really pointing toward. You desired connection, but underneath that was a deeper need to heal your fear of being known. When you addressed the root, the surface craving transformed. It stopped driving you and started guiding you. Years later, Kaito's scholarship deepened in unexpected ways. His understanding of texts became more nuanced because he now understood the human struggles behind the philosophy. And he understood them because he had finally allowed himself to be human, to need, to be vulnerable. When young scholars came to him feeling isolated by their studies, Kaito would tell them about his loneliness and what it taught him. "Don't try to eliminate desire," he would say. "Learn to read it. Every longing is pointing towards something. Sometimes toward healing, sometimes toward growth, sometimes toward understanding you couldn't reach another way. The desire itself is neutral. How you work with it determines whether it causes suffering or leads to freedom. Kaito's story reveals a profound teaching about desire that's often misunderstood. The Buddha did teach that craving causes suffering, but this doesn't mean all desire is bad or that we should try to eliminate every wanting. It means we need to understand what our desires are really about. Kaito's loneliness appeared to be a simple desire for companionship. But when Basui asked him to look deeper, a more complex picture emerged. The desire was pointing towards something that needed healing, his fear of being truly known, the wound that made connection feel dangerous. This is what the Buddha meant by investigating the nature of desire. Not fighting it or trying to suppress it, but looking closely at what it's trying to communicate. Every desire is like a symptom. You can try to eliminate symptoms, or you can listen to what they're telling you about underlying conditions. In Kaito's case, the underlying condition was old pain that made vulnerability feel unsafe. His mind had created a defense, become so knowledgeable, so accomplished that no one could criticize you. But this defense also prevented real connection. So the longing for connection persisted, getting stronger the more he tried to ignore it. This is common. We often chase external things, believing they'll satisfy us, when actually we're trying to fill an internal emptiness or heal an old wound. Kaito thought he needed friends. What he really needed was to heal the fear that prevented friendship. When Basui pointed out that Kaito was protecting himself even when connection was available, he was showing how desire and fear often work together. We want something, but we're also defending against it. This creates a kind of suffering that can't be resolved by getting what we think we want, because our defense prevents us from actually receiving it. The teaching here isn't to eliminate desire, but to use it as a mirror. What is this longing showing me about myself? What wound is it pointing toward? What healing is trying to happen? When we ask these questions, desire transforms from an enemy into a teacher. Kaito's shift from trying to impress people to allowing himself to be vulnerable was crucial. His fear had convinced him that being known was dangerous, so he hid behind accomplishment. But real connection requires being seen, including the parts we're not proud of. When he risked this vulnerability, he discovered that his fear was outdated. People didn't reject him for being human. They connected with him because of it. This is often how healing happens with desire. We discover that what we feared isn't actually dangerous now, even if it was dangerous once. Kaito's childhood taught him that being known led to criticism. His adult experience showed him something different, but he couldn't learn this without risking vulnerability. The Buddha's teaching about the middle way applies here. Not indulging every desire blindly, but not trying to eliminate all desire through force. Instead, using desire as information. What is this wanting telling me? What am I really seeking? What pain am I trying to soothe or avoid? Basui's distinction between overcoming desire and seeing through it is important. Overcoming suggests fighting, conquering, eliminating. Seeing through means understanding what the desire is really about, which often transforms it naturally. Kaito didn't overcome his loneliness through force of will. He saw through it to the underlying fear, and when he addressed that fear, the loneliness transformed. This doesn't mean all desires disappear when we understand them. Kaito still enjoyed connection. But the desperate quality of the longing eased because he was no longer trying to use connection to fix something only healing could address. The desire became simpler, cleaner, less driven by hidden need. We all do what Kaito did, chasing things we think will make us whole while avoiding the actual work of becoming whole. We want recognition to prove we're valuable. We want possessions to feel secure. We want control to feel safe. But these external things can't heal internal wounds. They can only temporarily distract us from them. The practice is to pause when strong desire arises and ask, what am I really wanting? Often the surface desire is a symbol for something deeper. We don't really want the expensive car. We want to feel successful. We don't really want that person's approval. We want to feel worthy. When we see what we're actually seeking, we can address it more directly. This is what it means to use desire as a mirror. Every longing reflects something back to us about our inner state. What do I feel is lacking? What wound am I trying to heal? What emptiness am I trying to fill? These questions turn desire from a problem into a teacher. In a prosperous city, there lived a merchant named Takahashi who had achieved everything he set out to accomplish. His business was successful. His home was elegant. His children were educated. By every measure, he had won at the game of life. Yet, Takahashi felt empty. He would stand in his beautiful home, surrounded by evidence of his success, and feel nothing. The satisfaction he expected never came. Each achievement brought a brief pleasure that quickly faded, leaving him looking for the next goal, the next acquisition, the next thing that might finally make him feel complete. He began to wonder if something was wrong with him. Other people seemed content with far less. Why couldn't he simply enjoy what he had? One day, an old family friend named Master NK came to visit. They had known each other since childhood, but their paths had diverged. Takahashi had pursued wealth. NK had become a Zen monk. They hadn't spoken in years. As they drank tea in Takahashi's elegant receiving room, NK asked about his life. Takahashi found himself speaking honestly in a way he rarely did. "I've achieved everything I wanted," he said. "Yet I feel nothing. Each success feels hollow. I keep thinking the next thing will be different, but it never is. What's wrong with me?" NK was quiet for a long moment. "Nothing is wrong with you. You're discovering what the Buddha taught, that external accomplishment can't fill internal emptiness. So I should give everything up? Live like a monk? That's not what I said. Tell me, what were you hoping these accomplishments would give you?" Takahashi had never asked himself this directly. I suppose, to feel worthy, to prove I was valuable, to silence the voice that said I wasn't enough. And did they? For a moment, maybe. Then the voice returns, louder than before. "Because external success can't change internal beliefs," NK said gently. "You've been trying to fix a spiritual problem with material solutions, like treating thirst by painting pictures of water." Takahashi felt something crack open inside him. He had spent 30 years chasing achievements, believing they would make him feel differently about himself. But the unworthiness he felt as a child was still there, unchanged by all his success. "The emptiness you feel," NK continued, "isn't a problem to solve. It's pointing toward something. What is it showing you?" Takahashi sat with the question. What was the emptiness showing him? That external things couldn't change how he felt inside. That he had been looking in the wrong place for the wrong thing. that maybe, possibly, the sense of being incomplete was itself the illusion. "I've been chasing fullness," Takahashi said slowly, "trying to fill an emptiness I thought was real. But maybe the emptiness is just a belief. Maybe I was never actually lacking anything?" Enkei smiled. "Now you're beginning to see. The Buddha taught that we suffer because we believe we're incomplete and that something outside ourselves can complete us. But we were always whole. The sense of lack is just a thought, not truth." Over the following months, Takahashi began sitting in meditation with Enkei's guidance. It was uncomfortable at first, sitting still without accomplishing anything. His mind wanted to plan, to achieve, to prove. But gradually, in the stillness, he began to notice something. When he wasn't trying to become something or achieve something, when he simply sat and breathed, there was a quality of okayness. Nothing special, nothing exciting. Just a basic sense that in this moment, without adding or subtracting anything, life was happening and it was enough. This didn't mean his business suddenly lost meaning or that his accomplishments were worthless. But they stopped being things he needed in order to be okay. They became things he did, not things that defined his worth. One day, walking through his home, Takahashi felt genuinely pleased by its beauty. Not because it proved anything about him, but simply because it was beautiful. The shift was subtle but profound. He had been using his home to convince himself he was valuable. Now he could just appreciate it as it was. When young merchants came to him for advice, eager to learn his secrets of success, Takahashi would often surprise them by talking about emptiness and desire rather than business strategies. "I achieved everything I thought I wanted," he would tell them, "and discovered it couldn't give me what I was really seeking. You'll probably need to learn this for yourself. But maybe you can learn it a bit sooner than I did. The emptiness you're trying to fill isn't real. You don't need to complete yourself. You need to see that you were never incomplete." Takahashi's story shows another dimension of what desire teaches. His achievements were real. His success was genuine. But he had been using external accomplishments to try to change how he felt internally. This never works because the two operate on different levels. The Buddha taught that much of our suffering comes from this confusion. We believe that getting, having, and achieving will make us feel complete. But the sense of incompleteness isn't based on what we lack externally. It's based on a misunderstanding of what we are. Takahashi's question, "What's wrong with me?" is one many people ask when external success doesn't bring expected happiness. The answer isn't that something is wrong, but that we're looking for happiness in the wrong place. We're trying to use the material world to fix a spiritual misunderstanding. Enkei's image of treating thirst by painting pictures of water captures this perfectly. No amount of painted water will quench real thirst. Similarly, no amount of external success will resolve internal feelings of unworthiness or incompleteness. The categories don't match. It's like trying to solve a math problem with a hammer. The crucial insight came when Takahashi recognized that he was trying to silence a voice that said he wasn't enough. This voice, this belief in his own inadequacy, couldn't be changed by achievement. It could only be seen through. The belief itself was the problem, not the lack of accomplishment. This is what the Buddha meant by investigating the nature of suffering. Takahashi's suffering wasn't caused by lacking things. He had plenty. His suffering was caused by believing that having more would make him feel differently about himself. This belief kept him on a treadmill, always chasing the next thing, never arriving at the satisfaction he sought. When Enkei asked what the emptiness was showing him, he was inviting Takahashi to use his dissatisfaction as a teacher. The emptiness wasn't a flaw to fix, but a pointer toward truth. It was showing him that external things can't resolve internal beliefs, that he was looking in the wrong place. The realization that the sense of lack might be the illusion was transformative. Takahashi had assumed his feelings of incompleteness were based on reality, that he actually was missing something. But what if the feeling was just a learned belief with no basis in truth? This is one of Buddhism's most radical teachings, that the fundamental sense of being incomplete, of lacking something essential, is not true. We're not broken beings who need fixing. We're whole beings who have learned to believe we're broken. The practice of meditation helped Takahashi discover this directly. When he sat, without trying to become or achieve anything, he found a basic okayness. Not ecstasy, not special states, just a simple recognition that in this moment nothing essential was missing. This is what Buddha nature means. The fundamental completeness that's present when we're not chasing or resisting. His shift from using his home to prove his worth to simply appreciating its beauty shows what changes when we stop trying to fill internal emptiness with external things. The things themselves don't become meaningless. They can be enjoyed more fully, actually, because we're not burdening them with the impossible task of making us feel complete. Both Kaito and Takahashi learned to read their desires differently. Kaito's loneliness pointed toward a need for healing old wounds. Takahashi's endless achieving pointed toward a belief in his own incompleteness that needed to be seen through. Both discovered that the desire itself was trying to teach them something if they knew how to listen. The Buddha's teaching isn't to eliminate desire, but to understand it. What is this wanting really about? What am I truly seeking? What belief or wound is driving this chase? When we investigate deeply, we often find that surface desires are covering deeper needs. And sometimes, like Takahashi, we discover that the deepest need is to see through the illusion that we need anything at all to be whole. This doesn't make us passive or unmotivated. Both Kaito and Takahashi continued to engage fully with life. But they were no longer driven by desperate attempts to fix something they believed was broken in themselves. They could act from wholeness rather than from lack. They could pursue goals without making their worth conditional on achieving them. This is the freedom Buddhism points toward. Not freedom from having desires or living in the world, but freedom from being enslaved by the belief that external things can fix internal misunderstandings. The practice is to keep investigating, keep looking at what our desires are teaching us, until we see through to the fundamental completeness that was always here. There was a monk named Daishin who had been practicing at his monastery for 5 years, and he was becoming increasingly discouraged. His meditation was restless. His mind wandered constantly. While other monks seemed to sit in peaceful stillness, Daishin's thoughts raced from one thing to another, never settling. He tried everything he knew to control his mind. He counted breaths, repeated mantras, visualized calming scenes. Sometimes these techniques would work for a few moments, but then the thoughts would return, rushing through his awareness like a river in flood. Daishin felt like a failure as a monk. What kind of practitioner couldn't even sit still for 30 minutes? What kind of meditation student couldn't quiet his own mind? He watched the senior monk sitting with apparent ease and felt ashamed of his constant mental turbulence. One evening, after a particularly frustrating meditation session, Daishin sought out his teacher, Master Daiju. He found her in the garden, pulling weeds in the fading light. "Master," he said, "I need to confess something. My meditation is terrible. My mind never stops. I've been trying for 5 years to make it still, but I'm failing. Perhaps I'm not suited for this practice." Daiju continued pulling weeds for a moment before responding. "Show me your mind," she said. "What?" "Your restless mind. The one that never stops. Show it to me." Daishin started to explain what he meant, but Daiju interrupted. "Not words about your mind. Your actual mind. Where is it? What does it look like?" Daishin paused, confused. His mind was right here, thinking these thoughts, feeling this frustration. But how could he show it? "I can't show you my mind directly," he finally said. "Then how do you know it's restless?" Daiju asked, setting down her weeding tool and looking at him directly. "Because I experience the thoughts. I feel them moving constantly." "And who is experiencing these thoughts?" Daishin opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Who was experiencing the thoughts? There was awareness of thinking happening, but when he looked for the one who was aware, he couldn't find a solid thing. Just awareness itself, watching thoughts arise and pass. "You've been fighting with thoughts," Daiju said gently, trying to make them stop. "But thoughts are like clouds in the sky. The sky doesn't fight the clouds. It doesn't try to push them away or hold them still. It just allows them to pass through. Your awareness is like the sky. Thoughts are like clouds. You've confused yourself with the clouds and forgotten you're the sky." "But the thoughts disturb my peace," Daishin said. "Do they? Or does your fighting with them disturb your peace?" Daishin considered this. When a thought arose, there was just a thought. The disturbance came when he judged it as wrong, when he tried to push it away, when he told himself he should be different than he was. "Try something," Daiju suggested. "Next time you sit, don't try to stop thoughts. Just watch them the way you'd watch clouds passing. Don't judge them as good or bad, wanted or unwanted. Just see that they arise, exist for a moment, and pass away. See if the watching itself is disturbed or only your idea about how meditation should be." That evening, Daishin tried this approach. He sat for meditation, expecting nothing, trying to control nothing. When a thought arose about dinner, he just noticed it. "There's a thought about dinner." When a memory surfaced, he noted it. "There's a memory." When planning started, he observed it. There's planning happening. Something remarkable occurred. The thoughts didn't stop, but they no longer bothered him. They arose and passed like clouds, just as Daiju had said. And underneath all the mental weather, there was a quality of stillness that had been there all along, hidden by his efforts to create it. The thoughts weren't the problem. His fighting with them had been the problem. Over the following weeks, Daishin's practice transformed. He stopped trying to achieve a particular state and started simply being present to whatever state was already occurring. Sometimes his mind was relatively quiet. Sometimes it was busy. Neither was better or worse. Both were just weather in the sky of awareness. One day, During a particularly active meditation where thoughts were coming rapidly, Daishin found himself smiling. He could see clearly now that the awareness watching the thoughts was completely undisturbed by them. Thoughts were movement in the mind, but awareness itself remained still, like the deep ocean remaining calm even while waves move on the surface. After meditation, he sought out Daiju again. "I think I understand now," he said. "I was trying to stop thoughts so I could find peace. But peace was already here, watching the thoughts. I couldn't see it because I was too busy fighting." "Yes," Daiju nodded. "This is what Zen points toward. Not a special state we have to create, but the natural awareness that's always present, whether thoughts are moving or still, whether feelings are pleasant or uncomfortable, whether circumstances are easy or difficult. When you stop demanding that experience be different than it is, you discover the peace that was here all along." "But doesn't practice mean trying to improve?" Daishin asked. "To become more peaceful, more concentrated?" "Practice means learning to see what's true," Daiju replied. "Sometimes concentration develops. Sometimes insight arises. Sometimes nothing special happens. All of this is practice. The trying to become something better was preventing you from seeing what you already are." Years later, when Daishin taught his own students, many would come to him with the same complaint he once had, that their minds were too active, that they couldn't achieve the peaceful states they thought meditation should bring. Daishin would smile, remembering his own struggle. "Your mind isn't the problem," he would tell them. "The problem is the idea that your mind should be different. Stop fighting what's happening. Just watch it. Thoughts arise. Let them. Thoughts pass. Let them. You are not the thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts appear and disappear. That awareness doesn't need to be fixed or improved. It's already complete." When students protested that this seemed too easy, that surely they needed to do something more, Daishin would ask them the same question Daiju had asked him: "Show me the problem that needs fixing." And when they looked for a solid problem, they would find only thoughts about problems, judgments about experience, ideas about how things should be. The actual present moment, when met without resistance, contained no problem at all. Daishin's story reveals something that takes most practitioners years to understand. The peace we seek isn't something we need to create. It's something we need to stop obscuring. His 5 years of struggle came from a fundamental misunderstanding. He thought meditation was about making thoughts stop. But thoughts arise and pass naturally, like waves on water. Trying to make the ocean perfectly still is both impossible and unnecessary. The depth beneath the waves is already still. When Daiju asked him to show her his mind, she was pointing to something essential. We talk about my mind as if it were a thing we possess, a problem we need to fix. But when we look for this solid mind thing, what do we find? Just awareness and the experiences arising within it. There's no separate entity that needs improvement. The Buddha taught about this through the concept of non-self. What we call I or my mind is actually a process, not a thing. Thoughts arise based on conditions, exist briefly, then pass away. There's no solid self having these thoughts, just the flow of experience itself. Daishin was identifying with the thoughts, the clouds. He thought he was the mental weather and that the weather needed to be perfect for him to be okay. But Daiju helped him see that he was actually the sky, the awareness in which all weather appears. The sky is never disturbed by clouds, rain, or sunshine. It allows all weather equally. This teaching about clouds and sky is one of Zen's most helpful images. Our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are constantly changing, constantly moving. But the awareness that knows them remains unchanged. Learning to rest in that awareness instead of identifying with the passing contents is the heart of practice. Daishin's discovery that fighting thoughts caused more disturbance than the thoughts themselves is crucial. The thoughts themselves are neutral. They arise, exist briefly, pass away. The suffering comes from our relationship with them, wanting them to stop, judging them as problems, believing we shouldn't be experiencing what we're experiencing. When he stopped fighting and simply watched, the thoughts continued, but the disturbance ended. This shows that peace isn't in the absence of thoughts, but in the presence of acceptance. We can be at peace with an active mind or a quiet mind. The mind state isn't what determines our peace. This applies far beyond meditation. We're constantly fighting with our experience, wanting things to be different than they are. We think we'll be happy when circumstances change, when we feel different, when problems are solved. But this, when things are different, happiness never arrives because there's always something else that's not quite right. The alternative is learning to rest in what is. Not passive resignation, but active acceptance. Seeing things as they actually are, rather than through the filter of how they should be. This doesn't mean we stop working to improve situations or grow as people. It means we stop making our peace conditional on everything being perfect. Daiju's teaching that practice means learning to see what's true rather than becoming something better is profound. We approach spiritual practice thinking we're broken beings who need fixing. But Zen points to the possibility that we're already complete, already whole, just confused about our nature. The trying to become better, more peaceful, more enlightened is often what prevents us from recognizing what we already are. It's like searching frantically for the glasses sitting on your head. The searching itself is the only problem. This doesn't mean practice is unnecessary or that nothing changes. Daishin did develop clarity and peace through his practice. But the development came through seeing, not through force. Through acceptance, not through resistance. Through letting go of the idea that he needed to be different. When he could simply be present to his experience as it was, without the overlay of judgment and resistance, he discovered peace he had been there all along. Not a special state achieved through effort, but the natural state revealed when effort is released. In a small temple in the mountains, there was a master named Daiju who taught in an unusual way. Unlike teachers who emphasized strict meditation schedules and formal practice, Daiju seemed to find teaching moments in ordinary activities. Washing dishes, sweeping floors, preparing meals, all of these were practice in her view. Students came from other monasteries, specifically to study with her, curious about her methods. Among them was a young monk named Rio, who had spent 3 years at a rigorous monastery where everything was about discipline and perfection. Every meditation posture had to be exact. Every ritual had to be performed flawlessly. Every moment was about doing things correctly. Rio arrived at Daiju's temple expecting similar strictness. Instead, he found an atmosphere of relaxed attention. Monks practiced meditation, but without the rigid formality he was used to. They worked in the gardens and kitchen with focus, but also with occasional laughter. It seemed almost too casual to be serious practice. During his first meditation session, Rio sat with perfect posture, counting his breaths with intense concentration. After 30 minutes, his back ached from holding himself so rigidly. He noticed other monks sitting more naturally, their postures upright, but not forced. One monk even shifted position mid-session, something that would have been forbidden at his old monastery. After meditation, Rio spoke with Daiju. "Master, I notice the practice here is quite informal. At my previous monastery, we maintained strict standards. Isn't precision important for spiritual development?" Daiju looked at him with gentle curiosity. "Show me your back," she said. Confused, Rio indicated his back. "Your posture was very precise just now," Daiju observed. "And how does your back feel?" "It aches." "Why?" "Because I was holding perfect posture." "And if your back hurts so much you can't pay attention to anything else, is that perfect practice?" Daiju asked. Rio hadn't considered this. He had been taught that discomfort was part of training, that pushing through pain built discipline. But now he realized that his rigid posture had actually prevented him from being present. He had been so focused on doing it right that he couldn't simply sit. "Presence doesn't require perfection," Daiju said. "In fact, the trying to be perfect often prevents presence. You were so busy managing your posture that you weren't actually meditating. You were just suffering your idea of what meditation should look like." Over the following days, Rio noticed this pattern in everything he did. When he swept the temple floor, he would focus so intently on perfect technique that he couldn't actually be present to the simple act of sweeping. When he prepared vegetables, he worried so much about cutting them uniformly that he missed the actual experience of the knife, the vegetable, the moment itself. One morning, Rio was washing dishes after breakfast. He tried to wash each bowl with precise movements, placing them in perfectly straight rows to dry. Daiju came into the kitchen and watched him for a moment. "Rio," she said, "are you washing dishes or performing a ritual?" "I'm washing dishes," he replied, uncertain. "It looks like you're trying to wash them perfectly rather than just washing them." "What's the difference?" Rio paused, his hands in the water. "When I try to do it perfectly, I'm thinking about technique, about how it looks, about whether I'm doing it right. When I just wash dishes, I'm here, feeling the water, seeing the bowl, doing what needs doing." "Yes," Daiju said simply and left him to continue. From that moment, something shifted in Rio's practice. He began to notice how often his pursuit of perfection pulled him away from presence, how his trying to be a good practitioner prevented him from actually practicing. He experimented with allowing imperfection, sitting in meditation with a posture that was attentive but comfortable rather than rigidly perfect, sweeping the floor with care but not obsessive precision, chopping vegetables with attention but accepting that they wouldn't all be identical. What surprised him was that his practice actually deepened. When he stopped demanding perfection, he could be more fully present. The energy he had been using to monitor and judge his performance became available for simple awareness. One evening, during a thunderstorm, the power went out in the temple. The scheduled evening meditation happened in darkness. Rio felt disoriented without the usual visual cues for checking his posture. He couldn't see if he was sitting as straight as he should. He couldn't monitor his form. In that darkness, With no way to evaluate his performance, something opened up. There was just sitting, just breathing, just being present to the sound of rain, the feeling of breath, the aliveness of this moment. No judgment, no comparison, no trying to be perfect. Just presence itself. When the candles were finally lit, Rio found tears on his face. He hadn't realized how much energy he'd been expending on trying to be a perfect practitioner. How much that trying had cost him in actual practice. After meditation, he sought out Daiju. "Master, tonight in the darkness, I couldn't check if I was doing it right. And somehow, that was the most present I've ever been." Daiju smiled. "Yes. When you stop trying to be perfect, you can actually be here. Presence doesn't need perfect conditions. It doesn't need perfect posture. It doesn't need anything except your willingness to be with what is." "But shouldn't we try to improve?" Rio asked. "To develop better concentration, clearer awareness?" "Development happens naturally when conditions are right," Daiju replied. "Like a plant growing towards sunlight. The plant doesn't try to grow. It just responds naturally to light and water. Your practice is the same. When you stop trying to force development and simply meet each moment with presence, development happens on its own." Rio stayed at Daiju's temple for 2 more years. During that time, he learned that spiritual practice wasn't about achieving perfection, but about being present to imperfection. That presence itself was the practice, not something that happened after you got everything right. When he eventually left to establish his own teaching, students noticed something different about him. Unlike some teachers who emphasized rigid discipline, Rio taught with a lightness that made practice feel accessible rather than intimidating. "Don't try to be perfect," he would tell his students. "Just be present. Perfection is a thought, an ideal, a goal that keeps you from being here now. Presence doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It's available in this moment, whatever this moment contains." When students worried that they weren't practicing correctly, Rio would ask them, "Are you here now? Are you aware? Then you're practicing. Everything else is extra." Rio's story addresses one of the most common obstacles to spiritual practice, the belief that we need to be perfect before we can truly practice, or that practice is about achieving some flawless state. His 3 years at the rigid monastery had taught him many useful things, but they had also installed a belief that spiritual development required perfection. Every moment became about evaluation. Am I doing this right? Is my posture correct? Is this the proper technique? This constant self-monitoring created a kind of mental overhead that actually prevented practice. He was so busy judging his meditation that he couldn't actually meditate. His attention was on his performance rather than on present experience. Daiju's question about whether his back pain constituted perfect practice was ingenious. It revealed the absurdity of his approach. What's the point of perfect posture if it causes so much pain that you can't be present? The form was defeating the purpose. This confusion between form and essence is common in spiritual practice. We learn techniques and forms that are meant to support awareness, but we start thinking the forms themselves are the goal. We forget that the techniques serve presence, not the other way around. Rio's insight about washing dishes captures this perfectly. When trying to wash them perfectly, his attention was on evaluation and technique. When just washing them, his attention was on the actual experience of washing. One was performance, the other was presence. The Buddha often taught about the middle way between extremes. Ryo's old monastery represented one extreme, rigid discipline and perfectionism. Daiju taught the middle way, attentive practice without rigid attachment to form, care without obsession, effort without force. The thunderstorm meditation was a gift because it removed Ryo's ability to monitor his performance. In the darkness, he couldn't check his posture or compare himself to others. He could only be present to the actual experience of sitting. And he discovered that presence itself was what he'd been seeking all along, hidden beneath his attempts to practice perfectly. This reveals something important about spiritual development. Ryo had been thinking that if he practiced perfectly, eventually he would become present. But presence isn't a result of perfect practice. Presence is the practice. When he was simply present, without the overlay of judgment and comparison, that was already what he sought. Daiju's image of a plant growing toward light is helpful. Plants don't try to grow. They don't evaluate their progress or worry if they're growing correctly. They simply respond naturally to their environment, and growth happens. Spiritual development is similar. When we meet each moment with simple presence, development unfolds naturally. This doesn't mean discipline is unnecessary or that anything goes. Daiju's temple had structure and practice. But the practice supported presence rather than replacing it with performance anxiety. The teaching that presence doesn't wait for perfect conditions is crucial for modern practitioners. We often think we'll practice when we have more time, better conditions, fewer distractions. But presence is always available, right now, in whatever conditions actually exist. Both Daishin and Ryo learned the same essential truth, that what we seek in spiritual practice isn't something we need to achieve through perfect performance. It's something we discover by letting go of our demands for how practice should be. Daishin learned to stop fighting his thoughts. Ryo learned to stop demanding perfection. Both discovered that presence itself, the simple awareness of what is, was what they'd been seeking all along through their various efforts. This is what it means to rest in what is. Not passive acceptance that leads nowhere, but active presence that meets each moment as it actually is, rather than as we think it should be. This presence doesn't require perfect conditions, perfect practice, or perfect understanding. It only requires our willingness to be here now with whatever is actually occurring. As you've journeyed through these stories tonight, you've encountered different faces of the same truth. Hiroshi learning to release the past. Kenjiro discovering freedom when his spiritual collection was taken. Takeo realizing that seeds don't need anxious checking. Misaki finding that her best work came when she stopped forcing. Kenshin seeing that the monastery's destruction couldn't touch what truly mattered. Ichiro discovering that freedom from attachment to winning made him more effective, not less. Yuki and Daichi learning that transformation needs time and trust. Mariko and Hideyoshi releasing the illusion of control. Kaito and Takahashi using desire as a mirror to see what truly needed attention. Daishin and Ryo discovering that presence doesn't require perfect conditions or perfect practice. All these stories point to the same understanding that the peace, freedom, and wholeness we seek isn't something we must achieve through effort, accumulation, or perfect performance. It's something we uncover by letting go of what obscures it. The Buddha's teaching on letting go isn't about loss. It's about liberation. Every time we release what we're grasping, we discover that we don't need it to be whole. Every time we let go of control, we find a deeper trust. Every time we stop demanding perfection, we find presence already here. This is the wisdom Zen has preserved for centuries, that what you seek, you already are. The awareness witnessing these words right now is the same awareness that was here before you read them and will be here after. It doesn't need improvement. It doesn't need to be fixed or achieved or perfected. It only needs to be recognized. As you allow yourself to rest now, you can let go of everything these stories have pointed toward. Let go of trying to remember the lessons. Let go of working to understand. Let go of managing this moment or planning the next. All that effort, all that trying, all that grasping can be released just for these hours. You've spent this time learning about letting go. Now you can practice it directly. Let go of being someone who needs to achieve something. Let go of the day behind you and the day ahead. Let go of problems that require solving and plans that need making. For now, simply rest in the awareness that's here when everything else is released. This awareness doesn't sleep in the usual sense. It remains quiet and still even as the body rests and dreams arise and pass. It's been here all along, watching your life unfold, unchanged by success or failure, gain or loss, achievement or disappointment. The peace you've been seeking through all your efforts is simply this awareness, recognized and allowed to be what it is. Not made better, not improved, not achieved. Just recognized. Just allowed. Just here. Rest in that now. The stories are complete. The teachings have been offered. What remains is simply this moment, this breath, this gentle allowing of what is. And in this allowing, you'll find what Zen has always pointed toward. Not something new gained, but something old remembered. Not something far away reached, but something always here recognized. The peace that was never actually missing. The wholeness that was never actually broken. The freedom that was never actually lost. Tonight you've learned what countless practitioners before you discovered, that letting go isn't about losing what matters. It's about releasing what never served you. The grasping, the forcing, the demanding that life be different than it is. When these fall away, what remains is simpler, lighter, more true. You don't need to carry these teachings into sleep. You don't need to remember the stories or practice the lessons. They've already done their work by pointing you back to what was always here. Now you can let even the teachings themselves go. Let your breath settle into its natural rhythm. Let your body sink deeper into rest. Let your mind release its hold on everything, including the idea that you need to hold anything at all. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.